So, for my creative project, I am going to speak about the freedom of speech movement and deep dive more on the topic. So, let's start with the 1930s, which it was a time where UC Berkeley was a politically active college, and this is where university students would typically devote themselves to global and national concerns, particularly peace and economic reform. And at the University of California, Berkeley, this political activism led to a rise of communist-influenced student movement during the Great Depression. So the UC Berkeley, the school UC Berkeley, did not favor this. So in order to keep radical elements out of the university throughout the state, the board, Regents, ordered university administrators to ban political activity on campus. And students did not like this since they could no longer pass out literature, start petition drives, socialite funds, pass out buttons, or introduce political candidates. And the university also made rules preventing any politicians or talk of politics. More importantly, these were sanctions put in to stop from any political talk being spread through the university. So after these sanctions, bans, and regulations were in place, UC Berkeley remained largely free of radicalism during this period. It wasn't until the late 1950s where UC Berkeley was ripe for student activism, and also the early 60s. So there were Berkeley liberals and radicals who witnessed the birth of the civil rights movement, and this ultimately motivated them to restore political freedom by forming SLATE in 1958. So SLATE had members that included liberals, moderates, Jews, and some black students. These students would activate for civil rights in America and would be greatly impacted by two events in 1963 and 1964. So the event in 1963 was a Freedom Riders event, and the event of 1964 was a Mississippi Freedom Summer. And to these students, they were considered to be life-changing. And something really, particularly of UC Berkeley, was that it had a rich intellectual life, but no or so little to political freedom. But this would be changed due to the free speech movement at Berkeley during 1964. In 1964, the Berkeley free speech movement was led by a small, informal, and ad hoc collection of Berkeley students who rallied to defend free speech and academic freedom. The tactics used by these students were mostly tactics used by the civil rights protests throughout the South in the summer of 1963 and 1964. Some of the students would take these tactics and use them as their own to protest for freedom of speech on campus. And one thing to notice was that the First Amendment states freedom of speech, and the campus itself denied full freedom of speech. So the students thought this was not something they would surrender to the Berkeley administration. So they would begin protesting, and the university did not like this, so they tried to crack down on student advocacy, to stop advocating for it. But they were met by resistance by the UC Berkeley student organizations. And during this time, it was the first time where various campus political groups would unite to oppose what the administration was doing, which was limiting freedom of speech. And to some of the groups that united together were not only the socialist groups, there were Young Democrats, there were Young Republicans, Student for Goldwater, there even was the Colgate Society of Individualists, who were considered by many on campus to be fascists. And one thing to note was that it's been since 1958 where student organizations have been fighting Berkeley administrators over the ban of political activities on campus. So to begin with the freedom of speech movement, it all began when Jack Weinberg, who was a graduate student of mathematics at Berkeley, assembled a makeshift table in front of Sproul Hall, UC Berkeley's main admission building. And what he did was that he began to pass out literature and soliciting funds for the Congress of Radical Equality, which was in direct violation of the university policy. So he was cited for violating the rules in place, and he was also banned from the university grounds to advocate. But he refused to leave, and soon was arrested. And as soon as he was arrested, he was handcuffed, put in the back seat. A large group of students would circle around the car, sit down to prevent the car from leaving, as they did not want their fellow protester to be taken away by law enforcement. So they sat down, but this is where another prominent student arrived, named Mario Savio, which was thought by many as the leader of freedom of speech movement. And this is where he would deliver a speech that inspired the crowd. After several more protests, the faculty itself from UC Berkeley would also side with the students, considering a win for the students itself that protested for freedom of speech. These many protests and fighting against the freedom of speech regulations would ultimately lead to a success for the students and allowing them to utilize the full freedom of speech. And today, most students on college campuses are able to enjoy the right to free speech, and they're also free to raise money and distribute literature on behalf of political and social causes at will. And something to be noted is that these rights and privileges are in large of the byproduct of efforts led by the Berkeley students of fall of 1964. It was also good to note that the Berkeley Revolt helped make the 1960s a time where students fought effectively for civil rights, free speech, and peace. So, to conclude, I just wanted to say that, to summarize it, was that UC Berkeley wanted to limit students' freedom of speech, so the students did not authorize or did not agree with this. So, and due to this, they started protesting, which was given the name free speech movement, as they would advocate for free speech, and they would end up successful. And something that connects with this is the anti-Vietnam War, which was considered a byproduct of the free speech movement, and the anti-Vietnam War movement was also successful, as the United States signed a peace treaty and recalled all its troops.